In this video, we'll be going over how to shoot a midfield angle with a HiPod setup. First things first is knowing where to set up with a HiPod, and that'll be at the 50-yard line, about 10 yards from the sideline. Now, this is all assuming you don't have access to a press box or a crow's nest. If you do, you want to take that spot and use a small tripod instead. But if you don't have access to that, you'll need the HiPod. When you're setting up, you'll want to check for obstructions on either the left or the right side of your HiPod. Make sure that there's nothing getting in the way, like a light pole or a tent. And you have a couple different options. You can either move from left to right, or you can go to the other side of the field at their 50-yard line. When it comes to setting up the equipment itself, we have a separate video for that, so feel free to check that out. Shooting from a HiPod in general is more difficult than a small tripod, since with a small tripod you can just move the camera yourself, but with the HiPod you need to use the remotes. You'll want to keep these remotes in hand because you'll be using them oftentimes at the same time. There's certain main things that you must always keep in mind when you're shooting, no matter from what angle or what equipment that you're using. For one, get all the players in the shot. Not all the referees, but all of the players. There should be 22 players on the field at any given time, and even if there's one way back in a play, you should zoom out so that everyone's in the shot. With that being said, don't zoom out too much. Leave about 5 to 10 yards behind the defense and about 5 yards behind the offense. And the reason why you give more to the defense is because you're assuming that the ball is going to go in that direction, unless there's an interception or something. The next really important thing is timing, and that can get a little bit tricky depending on what age group you're filming. First things first, in general, you want to capture each clip individually rather than the whole game as one long video. And we do this so that the coaches can individually select clips and not have to have all that downtime between them. With that being said, you don't want too much dead space either before or after the play. So the general rule is you hit record 5 to 7 seconds before the snap. And I'll go into more detail later about examples of good timing and bad timing. But one thing that you should understand is that it's sometimes tricky. It's something that you have to get a feel for, and you might mess up a couple times. For example, with youth football, the younger age groups, sometimes they'll stand around for an entire minute between plays, and sometimes it'll just be 5 seconds. And sometimes it's really hard to know. So you really just have to keep an eye out for the flow of the game. And if it's inconsistent, you'll just have to look at what the players are doing. If they're ducking down, getting ready to snap the ball, there'll be times where you hit record too early. And really, that's not the worst thing in the world. It's much better to have a clip that's too long in the beginning than one that starts too late. And once you've hit record and you're in it and you're not sure when they're going to snap the ball, just keep recording. It's not worth risking stopping recording and then hitting record too late if they just happen to snap the ball in that moment. After the play officially ends, you wait about 3 seconds to stop the recording. Now, there are a couple situations where you would want to keep it going longer. For example, if there's a huge pileup of players, you're going to want to wait until those players get up, because sometimes the coaches want to know what jersey numbers were involved in that pileup. Like I mentioned before, the HiPod is harder to shoot with than the small tripod. And one of the reasons for that is that the motorized head can only move so fast. There are a lot of situations where the players will suddenly start moving faster, like if one of them gets the ball past the defensive line and runs it in for a touchdown. Now, if you're not paying attention, you won't be able to move the camera fast enough to track that. And there are a couple ways to make sure that doesn't happen. One of the ways that you can do that is using the pole of the HiPod and twisting it manually to pan. Now, this works well in a pinch, but it doesn't look that good. It's a little jerky and it's a little jarring. It's much better to anticipate these movements and utilize your zoom out and panning at the same time with your remotes so that it'll look a lot smoother. Aside from every play in the game, there's going to be certain clips that you want to make sure to capture for every game that you film. And I'll go through them in order. The first shot of every game that you film should be the team captains, the coaches, and the refs meeting at the center of the field for the coin toss. This is just a good establishing shot that anybody watching can use to make sure that this is the game that they're looking for and that they're not watching the wrong one. After that, you'll go ahead and film every play of the first quarter, but while you're doing that, if there's a score change, either a full 6 points for a touchdown or 1 or 2 point conversion, you'll want to get a shot of the scoreboard to show people how the score changed. And that's just because when people are watching these videos, they won't be able to look at the scoreboard live as if they were actually there. So that's a helpful reminder for people to keep track. You'll also want to get a shot of the scoreboard at the end of each quarter. It's just another helpful reminder. And then you'll do the second quarter in the same way, and then the third quarter and the fourth quarter. And after you're done filming the scoreboard at the end of the fourth quarter after the game's done, the last shot you'll want to get is the two teams shaking hands in the middle of the field. This is a good closing shot. It kind of bookends the game. And there's one more shot that you want to get, and this shot won't be uploaded. It's more for you to help organize the clips when you're uploading if you have multiple games that you shot that day. You'll film just a second of the sky, and the reason that you do that is because it helps you look at a glance at where your games begin and end. You'll see a bunch of green shots of the field, and then suddenly you'll see one blue shot, so you'll know to separate those clips out. But of course you don't want to upload the clip of the sky. That's just for you. Now we're going to take a more in-depth look at some examples of these different shots that demonstrate framing, timing, flow, and other things. And we're going to look at both good and bad examples of each. First, we're going to look at some examples of bad framing. Now in this example here, there's way too much space on the right side and not enough space on the left side. Not only is somebody cut off on the left side here, but you would want there to be, in this case, since they're the defense, 5 to 10 yards of leeway. And on the offense, that would be about 5 yards. In this clip, we have something pretty similar, but the cameraman's making adjustments to fix it, which is totally fine, but the key is to make those adjustments before you start recording, rather than after. That'll make it look a lot more professional. Now, I have had many instances where I start recording thinking that the players are all going to stay here, but then suddenly this player goes all the way over here, and this player starts following him. In situations like that, it's inevitable that you'll have to readjust, which is totally fine. To do that more smoothly, just make sure to do a half press on the zoom in and zoom out buttons on the remote, rather than pressing it down the full way. That'll make it a lot slower and smoother. Yeah, you can see the adjustment being made so that the yardage leeway is about equal. Same thing right here, where everybody is in frame, but the offensive side has way too much leeway. You definitely want that on the defensive side instead, if anywhere. And it's the same thing here, too much leeway on the offensive side. Now in this shot here, the framing is too wide on both sides. Now, it's possible that the cameraman was looking to get the referees in the shot also, but you really don't need to do that. It's just the 22 players on the field that you need to worry about. Now we'll take a look at some examples of good framing. This shot right here starts off not quite correct, but the correction is nice and smooth. Here's a great example of adjusting your shot after the players move. So you can see more leeway giving over here once they've moved there. And this is pretty much as good as it can get. We're going to take a look at a couple examples of bad timing. Now with this clip, it starts right at the snap. You really want that 5 to 7 seconds before that moment. A lot of the coaches like to look at the way that the players are lined up and where they move, how they're organized, whatever else. In this clip, similarly, it starts right at the snap. And you actually end up missing quite a bit when you do that. So again, just 5 to 7 seconds. Here are a couple examples of good timing. In this clip, it starts with plenty of time before the snap, and we can see the way that the players are conducting themselves leading up to the start of the play. Now I will say, running back a little bit, seeing the players duck down like this is a very useful marker in your mind. At that point, you already should have been recording, but if you weren't, now's the time to start, for sure. Here's another good example where the recording is starting as the offensive line is breaking their huddle. And this is a great general rule. It's a surefire way to make sure that you have ample time. Now, it might take more than 5 to 7 seconds to get to the actual snap, but it is better to have a clip that's too long than one that starts too late. And there we go. Again, that was way longer than 5 to 7 seconds, but it's a good way to make sure that you're not too late. We're going to take a look at some examples of bad flow. Now, there are some other things happening in this clip too, like this player on the right side that went out of frame, and you don't want that to happen, especially when there's so much room on the left side that's not being used. Now, on the left side, you can see the quarterback going back, and he's about to pass the ball. And when passes occur like that, there's a lot of unexpected speed changes. And to help you prepare for that, if you think they're going to pass the ball, you want to start zooming out and panning accordingly, because again, your camera can only go so fast. This will make sure that you get everything no matter what happens. And again, there's a lot of stuff on the right side here that just wasn't getting caught. Here's another example of a pass that was missed. Now, again, this is based on intuition, but if you think that the quarterback might be passing the ball, start to zoom out and pan sooner than you would think you would have to, because this cameraman does it too late and misses the pass because of it. See, now they're starting to move the camera, and it's already over. Here's an example where a player runs the ball right in front of the camera rather than far away on the other side of the field. And when they're close, the play moves incredibly fast, and you need to be prepared for it with zooming and panning. Now, this particular camera person doesn't miss too much, but you can see on the left side there's a lot of unused space here, and they haven't quite started panning or adjusting the camera. So now that it's all the way this way, they have to be incredibly quick and kind of jerk the camera. Which isn't the worst, but it's best if you can zoom out a little bit slower and smoother. it makes for a much better video. Here's an example of camera movement that's a little bit too fast. Now, the cameraman's adjusting and all the players are getting into frame here, but it's very tight, and as you can see, when a pass is made, the camera pans really fast, jerks. And you don't have to do that. You can give a little bit of leeway, zoom out, and pan a lot slower so that it looks a lot smoother and it's easier to watch. Here's another example of jerky camera movement. Now they're also not getting all the players in the frame. I don't think number 4 was in the start of the clip. And again, when you're that far zoomed in, you have to jerk the camera really fast when the play is moving fast, and it doesn't have to be that way. Here's a more extreme example of a missed pass and catch. Now you can already see that there are players that are missing from the shot, and that's just really basic stuff. You want to zoom out more than that. But the cameraman was also just not looking to see if a pass was being made. While we're rewinding here, you can see them winding up, and the camera does not pan until after the catch is done, so they just weren't paying attention. So this is a play that you will see quite a bit, especially in junior games, where a huge run is made across the entire field and a touchdown is scored. Now, as soon as you start to see the ball breaking and the crowd starts to cheer, you should definitely be zooming out and panning already. And in this case, definitely don't be zooming in more. It's still important to get the players that are behind. Not always, especially those in the back that have already stopped moving. But sometimes the coaches want to see that too, if they wanted them to keep going. This is just another example of the lack of panning and zooming. Now when you're zoomed in that far, you have to jerk the camera really fast, but you're also missing a lot of players. Here's an example of why you should use both zooming and panning at the same time rather than just one. Now this player is going to make a run, and right when you see they're about to do that, you should start to pan and zoom. In this case, they're only panning, and that creates a very jerky camera movement. Here's some examples of good use of flow with the zooming and the panning. Now the framing here is already pretty good, but as the play progresses, they start to use the zooming and the panning at the same time, and that just makes it look so much more professional and smooth. Here's an example that goes back to what we were saying about timing. Now you want to start the recording as the kicker is setting up the ball and backing up, but also in terms of zooming and panning, you should already be zoomed out really far because that's always how kickoffs go. Here's a great example of anticipating play movement even when it ends up not happening. Now this player, it looks like they were getting ready for a pass, but they end up getting tackled. But as soon as that anticipation starts, the camera starts to zoom and pan in preparation. Now again, it doesn't end up happening, but if they did pass it, we would have been prepared. Here's a good example of that smooth movement. Now the framing's really good here, and it gets a little bit shaky because we have some players on the right side getting out of frame. But to compensate, they do zoom and pan at the same time, and it looks pretty good that way. We're we're going to take a look at some special situations that are aside from the standard plays that you would see where a ball is run or passed or something like that. First up, we got kickoffs. Here's an example of a kickoff where the panning is just too fast. Now, we've seen some other examples where the panning starts way sooner. So as soon as the quarterback starts to run, the panning is going. And here it started right at the kick itself. So it had to be a lot faster. And, the blurriness is not very good. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is that you can zoom out a lot farther, because this is one of the few situations where the basic rules of our shooting does not apply. And that is that all players need to be in the shot, and you just can't do that on kickoffs. The spread out is way too far. So the best that you can do is zoom out as far as you can to get as many people as you can at any given time. So when the kick is made, you pan over to the left or the other side of the field where the other team is going to retrieve it. Here's another kickoff example. The initial framing is pretty alright, but then after the kick is actually made, they start to zoom in a lot more than they need to. Again, this is just one of the general rules. You want to be able to see as many players as possible. There's no reason to zoom in that far on one player, even though a touchdown is being made. Here's a kickoff shot where we can even see right now on frame number 1 that the kicker has already kicked the ball, so we started way too late. Now you want to start as the kicker is setting up the ball and backing up in preparation to kick it. Now here's a punt instead of a kickoff. Pretty much the same deal in terms of how you film it though. In this situation, the cam operator was trying to get all 22 players in the frame, which is fine. It's not the biggest mistake in the world, but punts and kickoffs are one of the few situations where you do not need to do that. Here's a kickoff example where the camera is just a little bit too zoomed in. Now, you can compensate for that by doing a zoom out and pan at the same time, just kind of depending on your own style. Just don't be too jerky with the camera movement when you know that the ball is going to be going very quickly. This is how a kickoff should be filmed, where the recording has started well before they're starting to run for the kickoff, and once they do run, they're already panning to go to the other side of the field so that it's not too jerky and too fast. And they're also zooming in pretty well and following the action. Now here's a punt where it's framed well and it's zooming and panning out at the same time for a nice smooth movement. Here's a kickoff where the recording starts as the kicker is placing the ball down. And we'll skip ahead a little bit. And as the play progresses, the camera angle zooms in just right to follow the action. Another shot that's different from the norm would be a field goal. And in this situation, the camera is set up kind of like a normal play would be, but there's a lot more happening here. So you need to zoom out and capture both of the field goal posts, and also in this situation, you need 5 yards behind the kicker. Now, they fumbled the ball there, so they didn't really do a field goal, but you need to be prepared for that. Here's an example of good framing with a field goal. You have both of the posts in view, and you also have the kicker, and the camera doesn't really have to move. And that pretty much covers it. Now, to summarize, there are those main rules that you should follow, and that's just a good thing to keep in your head whenever you're shooting these games. So long as you follow those rules, you should be pretty good to go. You keep all the players in the shot, all 22 of them. You start every play recording 5 to 7 seconds before the snap, and then end the recording about 3 seconds after the play ends. Utilize your zooming and panning to follow the action of the play smoothly. And then with those rules in mind, you get every clip that you need to get out of the game, that being the coin toss at the beginning, every play from the first to the fourth quarter, making sure to get the scoreboard whenever a point is scored, and at the end of every quarter, and then also the handshaking at the end. And that's filming in a nutshell. By following those guidelines, you should be all good to go. Good luck!